All right. Well then, let's roll. Tonight's book is See That House by Judith Granahan. And Judy, this is actually your second book. The first book was called Dancers of the Third Age and was a very different story. But tell us a little bit about your background.
My background, well, I'm a mother of 4 sons, single. I have a nursing degree, worked in the nursing for 18 years. Had a friend one time call me up and tell me that he had a friend who was trying to teach a class on writing, and she needed some more students so that she could get the community college interested in her enough to let her have a room there. That's how I started writing, just to help out a friend. Here I am.
And so at the time, did you think you could write? Had you ever written before?
No, I had never written before.
Nothing at all?
No, and I'd always loved reading, but I'd never thought of writing anything.
So
grocery lists maybe, but that was it.
Yeah, those are very creative, right?
Yeah.
So what was the first thing you wrote for this class, given that you were an adult, you had never written?
Well, it was interesting. She had a very good philosophy. We would meet on a Tuesday night, reading what we had. But then she would give directions like, okay, now I want you to write about a flat tire. And so we would have to write about a flat tire and then bring that story on the next Tuesday. And that's when we got critiquing. Somebody would say, well, I can't see you fixing the flat tire. You say you're fixing it, but I can't see it. Or something is burning, I can't smell it. So it was a lot of, Lynn Lacrossier was in that, and Ross was in it. And it was a lot of just learning. None of us had written much. Lynn had written a book, I think, a story. But it was just, and we met at the hockey warming house over in Brooklyn Park because it was free. And so it just started that way, and it got exciting. I guess I was meant to write because I would bring something thinking, this is perfect. This is just absolutely perfect. And I'd get all this feedback and I'd be leaving that was crap. So I got to write better next time. And I'd go in all the time and say this. And somebody would say, well, I can't see it, or it doesn't make me feel. And that's what we were doing to each other. And it didn't bother any of us. Well, I do think maybe one person dropped out, but the rest of us just sort of stuck there and to see what we could do, because none of us really knew. We were just being honest about talking about what was going on. And the one gal that was the teacher was very kind. She would give you feedback that made you glad you had it. So,
well, and I know over the years, sometimes, every once in a while, some of our members and night writers, which some of us are in, will kind of joke, oh, I went home ready to just cry in a back alley somewhere and never write again.
Yeah.
I don't want to say we're brutal, we're honest, and sometimes people do go home thinking, oh my gosh, but I think in the end it's good. And as I've always said, I'd rather hear it from my writers group than after it's out in public.
Well, I had over the years been in another writers group too. And they wanted me to write the way they were writing. I mean, if they were writing a violent murder scene, I was supposed to write a violent murder scene. The thing that I've always liked about night writers is, this is the way Judy writes. I can see where she needs to fix this or add that, or it really reached me. But nobody said, now you can't write about that stuff because everybody in the world writes about it, and so you shouldn't. So people just let us, and it's always been that way. We've let each other go along their way and just basically listen, and then could hear what was missing maybe you can't see a scene, maybe you don't feel the scene, maybe that scene didn't fit with the week before, but we've never said to somebody, you shouldn't be writing about cats, you hate them, or something like that. You know?
Right. Or did you do the research? I know we've talked about that at times.
Yeah.
That really came up in your book a lot in See That House. But before we get into that, why don't you kind of give a recap about what See That House is about?
Well, the interesting thing, the way it started is I was in California and we went out walking in the woods and we get up on this sort of high hill and I looked across this long field and I said, see that house? That's an interesting house. Then I thought, well, who lives there with that kind of a backyard and that kind of a house? I can put anybody in there I want. And that's where it started. I had the scene, the physical scene, and I thought I can put the people in there. And at one time I had them, they were rich golf club owners. I threw that out. That was too boring. So, but it was, I guess I've always loved reading and wondered how people got stories. And so when I stood there and I had that in my head, I thought I have to keep working this one because it was thrown at me and I got to work it.
And so do you feel that you were sort of naturally drawn to fiction? Because I know some people in that original group do nonfiction. So what draws you to fiction in particular?
I'm lazy. I don't want to look up and find out who was the first person to bring a television into Maple Grove. You know, I don't want to do the research that nonfiction is.
And you did have to do some research for this. You had to learn something about corporate finances and about honeypots. I believe you did some research into some other subjects.
Well, it was fun because I was writing a story and I thought, okay, now how am I going to trap this person? I don't want to be a detective, you know, and have to have police come in or so. I've always, it's allowed me to use my imagination and then do some research, not an enormous all-night search for information, which is one reason why I thought I don't want to be a police detective or I don't want to, you know, be somebody that's an expert in the financial business and stuff. So
I had to kind of laugh at your comment that researching is fun because I've spent a day researching medieval funerals and medieval executions. So yeah, I've been digging for all the, you know, horrible ways that people do awful things to each other. Fun, right?
Yes, and then I recently said I don't like violence and I don't kill people, and then someone reminded me there's a dead person in the front of my book. So
there are dead people in all our books. Sex, violence, it's awful. So how did you develop this storyline? You started just from this idea, you know, of seeing this house. And I believe in another interview in Books and Brews, you said, why would somebody be envious of that house? And what happened from there?
Yeah, I to see it, it had to be beautiful or a wreck to you know, make it an impression. So seeing that house, I thought that would be a big, interesting house with either a long history or money or so what can I do? And at the time I was cleaning houses. And one of the houses I cleaned looked a lot like the design now in the book. And these people, I'm not going to tell you what their lifestyle was, but I leaned on that a little bit. And it was just fun to not have any restrictions on how I was going forward. That's why I like fiction. And then I started, here's the one thing that I would, when I write, not if I write, when I write another book, I just sat down and started writing that book. And I got into a couple of chapters and I had nowhere to go. I needed more people. And I needed to have them on some kind of conquest or quest. So then when I figured that out, I had to go back and rework the beginning in order to fit these in. So I promised myself that when I write my next book, I will have maybe, you know, not all the detail, but I will have the beginning, middle, and end in my head before I start putting the characters in.
So you are sort of what we call a pantser. You write by the seat of your pants.
I do.
So in that case, then which characters came first? Did you start with Kate Mackenzie? Did you start with these evil brothers?
I started with Kate Mackenzie looking down at that house and saying, see that house, and just curious as to, you know, what's over there. And then I went, put her back, I put her in at work, at her job. And coincidentally, at her job, she had just started, she was a graphic artist. Well, this woman died in the company and she needed to be replaced. And so Kate was just put into her position because the company didn't have room for a novice graphic arts, and she had had some background in mathematics. So then when she replaced this person, she found out that this person wasn't what she was supposed to be. And that's when the problem, the whole crux of the book showed up. I had to take care of moving the book forward. I stopped then and I stopped and think, who are these people? What do they need to do? And I don't want any violence. I don't want to be a brilliant detective. So how do people solve problems? Because I truly believe that most of us, given a problem, will go about trying to figure out how to fix it or solve it. And so that was the basis I went, and Kate, she saw something and she needed to figure it out and find out what was going on.
And still, there did end up being some violence at the end of it, in a sense.
In a sense, yes. But then
pretty awful things.
Yes, but then there was a big, huge saving of a whole lot of girls. So sometimes
I want to open this up to all the readers. How did you feel about the characters? How did you see Kate? Did you like things about her? Did you dislike or wish she'd done some things differently?
Are you asking me or the writer?
I'm asking all the readers.
I want to tell you, Judy, I started at Night Riders while you were kind of in the trying to write the end of your book, kind of in the middle toward the end. And so I'd never heard or read the beginning part of it. And I loved the way you put Kate at work. I thought that it was fantastic the way she really wanted to be a graphic design artist and was pigeonholed and forced to be in this finance area. And even though she didn't want to be there, I thought it was great the way you kind of worked in her father making them do these puzzles so that she always had to keep going, always had to figure things out. I thought that was really masterful.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I liked Kate. She just seemed like someone, you know, that I could relate to. You know, she's a single woman, you know, kind of advancing in her career, and then things don't go exactly, you know, as she wants, but she just has to, yeah, she just kind of follows her curiosity and lets that lead her, but she doesn't. Yeah, I guess it's because she cares. You know, some people could just be, you know, like, oh, whatever, this doesn't concern me. I'm just here for a paycheck, you know, but she used her head, which I really liked.
Yeah, I think my nursing helped because I saw patients work through problems. I rarely ever saw a patient give up. And some people had some really tremendous issues. And my parents had a terrible marriage. And I saw how they made a life for themselves eventually. So I've always been so glad I wasn't born filthy rich with a silver spoon in my mouth. I would.
Yeah, where would be the challenge?
I can't share that gratitude.
But now I could win the lottery and I wouldn't mind.
Yeah, because now you're smart and you have all the character that you need.
But yeah, I've always loved reading. It just took me places. You know, I grew up in a small town. And so reading was like opened up a whole world. And so I just.
Well, you grew up in Boston, didn't you?
Oh, Foxborough, which is 25 miles south of Boston. And
Okay.
When I was there were about 1,200 people in the town.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
And yet none of your writing is set in Boston.
No.
Why is that?
I moved out of there in 1965.
Mm-hmm.
It has totally changed. I go back to visit, but it's not the Boston I ever knew. And what the Boston I knew was the Irish Boston and the Italian Boston, and they didn't like each other. Then there was the Jewish contingent up near the state capitol, and it was a very prejudiced life, and I didn't want to put that in. So I tried doing Boston and the cafes that I went to while I was a nursing student and that type of thing, but I just couldn't build a story.
I think that would be a very interesting story because Boston is so completely changed.
Yes.
Look at history that many people are never going to know.
Yeah. I went back looking for Beacon Hill and Boston Commons several years ago, and I was just so anxious to see it again. Somebody took it away. It's gone.
Yeah, I think, I actually lived there in the summer of 1988, and I worked on Kenmore Square.
Oh, yeah.
Donuts there, and my apartment overlooked the Fens. And I took my kids back in 2006. I could barely recognize Kenmore.
Yes. Yeah.
Even in that time, it had changed so much.
Yes. I think if I ever when I write another book, it won't be going back in time. Every time I've gone back in time to see my town that I grew up in, when you go back 20 years later, things have changed so dramatically that it's painful, I think. You remember things one way, and now they're different.
So you just like writing about contemporary, just the current time period.
Yeah.
So what did people think of the setting of the book and the fact that there really was no identifiable setting? Did you like that? Did you kind of want to know exactly where it really was?
I liked it because I wasn't confined then to be accurate. I could develop the area as I wanted to. So my laziness had a bit to do with that.
I kind of pictured it being, I don't know, maybe in the Ozarks or something like that, just because when she goes to visit the family of the girl, it was the family of the girl who died, right? She goes to visit, or and they're kind of like hillbillies almost, right?
Well, if you spent much time in northern Minnesota, that feels that way.
There too.
Yeah,
but there are no mountains to drive.
No, it was hilly. It was hilly in that area.
I know, but see, you come down from Grand Marais along Lake Superior, and I pictured that as where the car would go off. And then I realized, it's not steep enough, but I still kept that in my head. I made the hills bigger and the lake longer. Yeah. But, so it was.
I spent some of my early years, as you know, I grew up in the military, in the Air Force. My dad was in the Air Force. And so 3 years, and then a separate other half year, I lived in Virginia, and so we would travel into West Virginia. And the whole time I was listening to this as you read it, I was really picturing some of those hills in, what is it, the Alleghenies, the Blue Ridge
Yeah,
Mountains.
yeah.
That's where I was picturing it too. So more like Becky, more, I don't think the Ozarks are quite there, but more in that direction.
It's funny, I pictured California. I pictured,
Really?
yeah, I pictured kind of like in and around San Francisco in that area. I don't know why.
Well, then I'm proud of myself because I was trying not to make it regional.
Yeah.
And
What
so,
about you, Sean? Where did you think it was set?
You know, I think it's funny because I think everyone's thinking based on their own experiences.
yeah,
And I always pictured kind of like the I don't know if anyone's ever driven through the Needles in South Dakota,
Yeah.
but that's what that reminded me of, like the roads that they're talking about that Hallelujah was swerving all along at the beginning of the movie. That's what I reminded me of was the Needles in South Dakota.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would work too.
Yeah, and that actually was came from a time when I was in North Carolina up in the hills on a vacation, and how you get close to the edge and then back. And then I got to thinking, if you really sped through there, you would be in trouble. And so, yeah, I tried to keep it just a general location.
Well, I think it worked, and I think it's really interesting how everybody pictured somewhere in a completely different
Yeah,
region of the country, for literally from coast to coast and in between.
Yeah.
yeah.
So how often do you sit down and write, Judy?
Well, when I was doing that book, it was every day, all, you know, I was working part-time. So when I was not working, then I was writing. And the book took me far longer than it should have because I did not have an outline and a driving force. So I had to go back and redo. When I do write the next time, I really hope I have a direction of where I want to go.
I'm curious, Judy, how you, what made you decide to weave in the sex trafficking into the plot?
Well, I got going in the book and I thought, but why would somebody just want to read somebody who gets away with stealing something and another person almost catches them? What is the point of reading the book rather than just a mystery? Is there some good that can come out of this? And one of the things during my nursing, I'm not going to say which, it was in Massachusetts, but it was at a mental hospital that all our rotations were 3 months. And there were several girls there that had been way back then forced into sexual experiences, and they were trying to pull themselves up and find a life for themselves. So I thought, why can't I put some of that in here, that it's possible to go beyond what's happened to you. So that's, and I think at the time when I was doing the book too, there was a tremendous amount of sex trafficking going on between Minnesota, the 35W highway from Mexico to Canada. It was just streaming up and down there, and they were bringing in girls from other countries for sex hovels here, where rich people paid to have sex with them, and it was in the news. And so I thought, that's one thing I can have, you know, them being exploited rather than just somebody. Because I had a dear friend in high school who years later I went back, and here she's standing in Boston train station, depot in Boston, and she is all dressed up like you couldn't believe, and she was a prostitute, because I had talked to somebody else and they said she had gone on to doing that. And then strangely enough, 3 years later, I'm out in Hawaii, and there she is with her great big ranch, and I got to meet with her and talk with her. And what happened to her was her mother died a tremendously horrible death when she was when we were all in high school together, and she didn't tell anybody about it. And so she kind of inspired me as far as people can have great tragedy and stumble along the way and still end up with a very fine life. Might not be a wealthy one or whatever, but a happy life. So
that brings up the question. So you as readers, you know, when you read about these girls at the end of the book, did you kind of wonder what happens to them next? No.
Well, we got to hear a lot of different permutations of that when Judy was going through that epilogue.
Yes.
But it was fun. It was fun to think about, how would they move on in their lives after having such trauma, and how could Kate still maintain involvement in that? Because if you run across something like that, it's going to be life-changing, and to just then back out of that, I don't think Kate would want to release some kind of involvement there. So I think you had that right.
Yeah, and I kind of thought for a while that I would write a sequel to it, but I haven't been able to inspire a story in my head. So, it would be
I think it's part of why that ending worked, because I know in Night Riders, we discuss this a lot. You know, how does this fit in with the beginning of the book and so on?
Yeah.
You did a really good job, I thought, in the end, of tying it together with, it fits with what started the whole story, was that Rose had this horrible experience and she let it destroy her life. And she spent her life just full of bitterness, anger, revenge, and taking it, in a sense, you know, inflicting that on her boys. She really ended up their lives too.
Yeah.
But then in the end, she sees these girls who really have actually suffered far worse than she did. And she finally makes the decision to help them. And so there was an interesting way it circled around from this incident that started it, brought it around to what was happening, brought Kate into it, and ended up with Kate rescuing these girls. And that ended up finally being the moment when Rose decided to change her life.
And I did that because I felt like I had kind of dumped Rose out of the car and just left her, you know, and I felt like I had to, that she was somebody that would be, I guess, really devastated if she just walked totally away from all of this. And so I needed her to feel like she had some stuff to contribute.
And I like the lesson too of her kind of realizing finally that, okay, so she destroys this man who did her injury. It's not going to really make her life better.
No.
Where do you go from there? Okay, you ruined him, now what?
And that's when she also realized she was ruining her own sons to get her revenge.
How did the rest of you as readers feel about that?
Well, I really liked, I mean, I think it's an interesting twist because a lot of times you'll have like the motivation of the bad guys, like they had like some trauma in their background that makes them be bad guys, you know, but often that isn't actually brought into the story. It's more of a backstory, right? So here we got to have, you know, Kate was the instigator of them being the bad guys. But it wasn't like what you would expect. Yeah, so I think it kind of took kind of a trope that's been done a lot, but really put a different spin on it. So I liked that.
Thank you. You know, it's wonderful to be somebody else. I think we all feel that way. You get to live another life in your head, and you get to put it on paper. it just, yeah, it brought me always someplace else when I was sitting down to write. I could think about what if I was that person doing that thing. And so that's another reason why I would not do nonfiction. I would have to make sure that John Adams did whatever John Adams did.
Well, not everyone's that particular with their research, unfortunately. Tell us a little bit about this whole process of getting feedback as your story moves on.
Well, that's where I think the us as a group is the most marvelous thing there is. The whole thing started when a friend called and said this gal had wanted to just to teach writing, and she eventually died of cancer. But she would sometimes she would cremate my stuff that I had read, and I'd still come back for more because I knew she was right, and it was a challenge to be better. And I had taken a writing class, and I couldn't stand it. It was punctuation and just, it was very educational, but not imagination. So I just kept going at it. And besides, what else am I going to do when the evening comes around and I don't have kids' diapers to change or kids to take to ball games or animals to get outside? So I just started entertaining myself. I guess that's what I was doing, entertaining myself.
And how much do you, yeah?
And having read many bad books, lousy book, what I call, I don't like romance novels that everybody turns out sweet and lovely. I don't like murder mysteries where there's violently awful people. So I thought, okay, if that's your opinion, what are you going to do about it? And so I felt,
it's that old write what you know, isn't it?
yeah.
Or write what you want to read, I mean.
Yeah, yes, yes.
So how has your writing changed from those very early days? What were you writing the same sorts of things, and how, in what ways has your writing improved because of the feedback?
Well, I think that I was kind of writing the same idea that you try something, something happens and you go on to fix it. I wasn't writing, like I said, the real technical murder mysteries and that type of thing. I just wanted to give my characters a chance to go off and do something. And in fact, in the process of writing this book, I did have my main character being something interested in, I forget now what, I think it was boating of some kind. And somebody else was interested in climbing the mountains to get to a scary point. And I thought, that's not my story. So that brought me back to the main story instead of going off on tangents.
Well, you have another book too, Dancers of the Third Age, which in a way is quite different. This one, See That House, really involves a mystery and this whole corporate finance and theft and embezzlement and sex trafficking, whereas Dancers of the Third Age is more, I almost want to say it's a coming of age story for an old lady.
It is.
Facing something in her past finally for the first time.
Right.
What inspired that novel? Has anybody in this group read that one apart from me and Judy?
No, I haven't.
Okay, tell us how that one came about.
Well, I started writing it and I thought, okay, I got to give these women something to do and they can't be successful. Then I thought, nope, I'm going to have them, I have to have some tension right from the beginning. So I have them meet, but they don't like each other. And they're quite very different. But as they get to know each other, they find out that they all have the same family sort of problem. And they're all handling it different.
It's Ginger, Libby, and Abby May. Tell us about them as characters.
Yeah. Ginger is I think she's the wealthy one. Libby is ordinary, hardworking. And so they didn't like the gal that had all the money because she was privileged, and so there was this conflict there. And I thought, yes, we meet people we don't like, that we don't match up with, and eventually we find out, oh, there's a little something there that is interesting. And so I tried to pull these three women together. So when I got them, so they were beginning to tell each other their story, I thought, okay, now what do I do? Well, I need them both to, I need at least two of them to have the same crusade that they have to go and fix, and they can help each other with it. So it's, again, it's finding a problem and deciding how to fix it. And I had a neighbor recently tell me, why didn't I write a sequel to that? And I thought,
Well, she sort of solved the problem in the end of that book.
yes, she did. But I think that the neighbor wanted me to go on and give her another problem, and because I'm assuming that she liked the characters and she wanted to hear more about them.
But that runs into a problem with writing books, and I think we see this a lot in movies, where it's almost a given, not always, but very often the sequel is not as good as the first.
Yes.
And I believe that's because the sequel was only made because people like the characters.
Yeah.
And really have a story to tell. Like, Sean, you have a trilogy. Each of the books works because there's one story. There is an ongoing problem to tell. But Judy, I'm curious, where do these characters come from? You've got Ginger, who's this, rich, kind of conceited, arrogant woman. You've got Libby, who's a little more middle of the road. You've got Anna May, who's maybe almost lower class, comes from this abusive marriage, has this trauma. Then you've got Kate McKenzie, who's completely different from any of them. You've got the evil Jackson. What are the two brothers' names?
Marshall.
Yeah, and Jackson.
Marshall and Jackson. Where do all these characters come from?
Oh, my imagination, but they're and I grew up in a small town, and so you hear stories, a little bit about what's going on. It's like I live in Maple Grove. I don't know a whole lot about each of my neighbors, and part of that's because we all don't have small kids together and we're learning about each other. But the stories that went around in town, and that I had one friend in high school that they thought she was just scum, and she wasn't. I had another friend that was so quiet and reserved that she just had an awful time talking to people. There were only 52 in my class, and we had been together almost since 7th grade. So it was a way to get to meet different personalities, the ones that were always the center of everybody's attention, the ones that's sitting over in the corner that doesn't participate but would like to. So I got a chance to learn about these people, not in just a 6 months neighborhood or something, but over time. And then I had some odd relatives and some with some problems. So I guess I've always been a people watcher, and my father was always very critical of people, and I thought that's totally unfair. You don't know what their situation is. You need to give people a chance. So where does someone like Kate McKenzie come from? I mean, did you know someone like her? Is she purely out of your imagination? I know a lot of very strong nurses. Some of them I was in school with. Some of them, we went through a big nursing strike, which was difficult for people. We were without pay for a while. So nursing, you're expected to be emotional and to look at somebody and talk to them. And so I got to know people. And then the other thing is, I was divorced when I went back to the university and got my nursing degree. And I was absolutely shocked that the kids that were in class didn't think of me any different than they did each other. Because I thought they're going to think, oh, that's the old lady. I was 40. That's the old lady. But no, I was just another classmate. We would go out and have a beer together or study together. So I guess I've always felt accepted and that people are different and they should be. I've done house cleaning for several years. I get paid to exercise, I say. And I've met some extremely interesting, kind, nice people, but they're all different. And so I wanted people that were different from each other. And yet I don't want my friends to figure out who I'm talking about.
So you have to.
Although I did like the name of the secretary, Nan Anderson.
Oh, well, somebody I know with that last name said, I'm never in that book. I said, well, I'll put you in this way. No, I don't want my whole name in there. And I said, well, then I'll put your name in.
That's so funny. I was just talking to my son in Iowa yesterday, and he was asking about this book I'm currently working on, and I was telling him, about the ghost and this, that, and the other. He's like, I want to be a ghost in your book.
Uh-huh.
Be a ghost, like what's the ghost name in the Harry Potter series, the mischievous one? Peevy or Peevesy or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what's his name?
It's Peeves, isn't it?
Peeves, I think it's
Yeah.
Peeves. Yeah, so he informed me, I want to be a ghost like Peeves in your novel. I want to cause some mischief. I'm like, hey, I'm done with the book. I'm not sure if I can write you in at this stage. There's a really kind of fascinating concept at the end of this book. The whole thing revolves around these two men who are going to embezzle, few million dollars.
Yep.
From their employer. How did you go about learning all the ins and outs of computers and this concept of honeypots about how they catch them?
Well, it's interesting. Our next door neighbor at the time is a honey man. He owns an extensive bee farm. And so he's talking about honeypot. And I said, well, for the bees. And he said, no, you're writing a mystery, and there's a thing called a honeypot where it's something you're stealing, and you're putting all of the emphasis in getting the money or whatever you're stealing into the honeypot. So just talking to people. And I found when people find out you're trying to write something, they're always asking you questions. And when they ask me questions, I come up with some answers that fit in my book.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally I've had people on my other book and say, I was so glad you didn't kill those women off, or that they stayed friends. So it's I guess it's just, I had a lot of relatives in small town and just watched people doing things. And the woman that lived down the street was a tremendous alcoholic, and her son was in my class, and her daughter was a little bit younger, and we hung around together. It was sad watching that whole thing. So it's just always from life.
Yeah. Do any of the readers have questions for Judy? What things did you especially like about the book?
Well, one thing that I really liked, and I'm only about 60% through the book so far. So, but what I've really liked so far is the level of uncomfortability that you put Kate in. So it reminded me a lot of like a Janet Ivanovich, Stephanie Plum book almost. If you've got someone here that's a graphic designer, she's really into that. She gets put into finance, so that's the first level of uncomfortability. And then on top of that, she's suddenly thrown in this whole situation where she's uncovering this whole embezzlement scheme. And I love that because for her, it's not natural. At least that's what I look at it as.
Yeah.
It's something that she gets thrown into almost and I don't know if and I'm not trying to say you're copying Janet Ivanovich, but it's the same kind of idea, and that's one of the things that's endearing about Stephanie Plum in those series, is the fact that you're getting thrown into this whole world that you're not accustomed to, and so you have this whole level of almost like humor about it, and that's what I really liked about your writing in that character.
Oh, thank you. I kind of got thrown into the whole world when I got divorced. I was going to have this lifelong marriage. And I was just totally shocked when it ended up in the divorce, and I had to figure out what to do. And I think that was part of very helpful in trying to put this book together.
Uh-huh.
And that's part of where Kate is at, that she was widowed very unexpectedly and at a relatively young age. So you're probably drawing on some of that experience of, wait, this wasn't how life was supposed to be.
Yes, yes, yeah.
So Lisa, what was your favorite part of the book?
Well, I mean, I love the ending. I loved how you wrap that all up for sure. But I'm really enjoying the beginning part of it because I hadn't read that yet. So just the way, you know, Hallelujah is pushed off the mountain, and then the characters, the pink ruffled lady, Celia, you know, kind of coming in with a sticky bun and connecting her, and then this Dusty, and I just love the way you weave the characters in. There are a lot of characters, but I feel like I know all of them. There's the nosy, you know, office girl, the gossip, and all of those things just ring so true.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's, as I said, nursing, I've met a lot of people, and that has helped. And I've had some, and you know, in a small town and growing up in high school, you've got a whole class that's got a very strong opinion about other people in the class. And so there was a lot of bickering and status and that type of thing in the class too. Then the sad part, I went back for my reunion many years ago, but I think there were only 3 of us left. And so it was really sad that had ended.
Yeah. I liked the love interest, and you keep it very subtle. But what's the guy's name again? The master of disguise.
Yeah, Jimbo.
Jim.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I just thought it was really well when he first like leaps over the fence or whatever he does, and at the, you know, and they're in this weird cabin, and you know, you really don't know, like, is he just like some kind of bizarre freak character? But then he turns out to be like, what was he, like a Navy SEAL? Or
He had been, yes.
Yeah. Had been a Navy SEAL, and now he does like super secret security stuff. Yeah, I just thought all that was really cool. And you know, and Kate trying to figure out, you know, like, should I be worried about this guy, or is he really on my side? So I thought that made for some nice scenes in there. Like when he's having all the like the spyware, whatever he's having installed around the outside of her house, you know, and then, like, she's like really not quite sure even at that point. Should I be trusting this guy? So yeah, I liked all of those scenes a lot.
I wrote that several times because I was, you know, worried that for her that something could, you know, the way my book was going, I could have somebody, but I wanted somebody who was not an official, where she had to report everything to the police, and that he could do this. So it was just, that's the fun about writing fiction. There probably isn't too many people that would just sort of bump into a good security guard, you know, but yeah, you can just put them in there. And I wanted to have a love life in there, but I didn't want to write romance. So,
Yeah, you pulled it off really well. Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, I think sometimes romance works better when it's not the main focus of the story, but it's what happens in the course of the story.
Yeah,
One of the things I really liked was that nobody in this story is really all good or all bad. And I've seen stories where the bad guys are bad and the good people are good. And your characters are a little more realistic, like Haley, Hallelujah.
yeah,
She's not admirable in a lot of ways, but then we find out some of the backstory
yeah,
and we can say, okay, what she did was wrong, but you at least begin to understand all these layers and levels of how everything that everybody else did years ago is affecting, sending out all these ripples,
yeah,
affecting everybody else. You know, we see Rose, who she's a victim, and yet she's not a very nice person, and yet she has some redemption at the end. And I think that's very true to life. So I really liked that.
thank you. Yeah, I had a dear friend in high school who I'm forgetting now what the backstory was, but she'd grown up in Boston and moved out to Foxborough to stay with these people that were just down the street from us. And she was my age. But since she was new in town, nobody was interested in her. So I got to know her. And over time, she felt that she was sent out there to be put in the mental hospital, which was a huge mental hospital in Foxborough. And she thought that that was where she was headed. But these people said that, well, you can stay with us. And they turned her life around just because they cared. And so that gave me another sort of idea to think about when I was putting this together.
Yeah, the impact for good or bad.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the writing process. These books, as any author knows, do, or at least should, go through many drafts. At what point did you finally say your book is ready for printing?
Well, this time was when Robin finally said, aren't you done with that yet?
Print it and be done with it, huh?
And I said, I think so. I'm close. I got bored with it, in a sense. I had no more problems to solve. I just had to put it down on paper. So I thought, this is enough of this story. If I was reading the book, I don't want to go on for the next 20 years of talking about this person. So I felt that I had done what I could with each person, and that I kind of kept them on sort of an equal basis. And so I don't know, I thought, should I throw in one more? At one point I remember thinking, I could do this, one more bad thing. No, I don't want to do that.
Right. Keep it centered on the story.
Yeah.
So where did you go about getting it printed, and how do you advertise your book?
Well, I went to Amazon.com and went and got that printed. I'm terrible about advertising. I get up in the morning thinking I'm going to do all of this and this and this and this, and then I get distracted and I don't do it. So keep telling myself I've got to work harder on advertising, because the people who have read it have liked the book. And I thought, no, I got to keep going because other people will like the book too. And then there's a great deal of sort of satisfaction making your relatives feel obligated to buy one. And hope that they talk about it and pass on the idea of it to other people.
That whole advertising, I think that's the bane of most authors.
Yes, yeah. And yet if you don't do it, somebody will. I know in the original writers group, there was somebody who had their book, was really close. She was done with it, and so she hired a company. And that didn't work out very well at all. They charged her a lot of money to start with. When they put it out, she didn't like the way they set it up. She was extremely disappointed. And that's when we were beginning to learn that, you know, the author can take some charge of things.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I first started writing, it was like, you do the writing that somebody else has to fix everything else. And now people have gone away from that. I want, you know, the writer wants control of where it goes, who reads it.
Yeah. The writing world has changed a lot
Yeah,
since
yeah,
the writing group began, because that's about 35 years ago or more.
yes,
now.
yes.
So before we wrap up, does anybody have any questions they want to ask Judy about the book, about the characters, the setting, creating a mystery, anything?
One thing I'd like to say about our group is the support that we give each other. As I said, no one's trying to change somebody else's story. We try and just help them make it so we all hear it and feel it. So it's always been a real supportive group. I had been in a couple of other writers groups and I did not like them. I was, you know, this is not the way you should be doing this. It's not a good lead-in line.
I was really lucky. Night Writers is the first writers group that I ever joined. And for those who don't know the story, they used to meet in the Maple Grove Community Center, and I was teaching lessons in the Maple Grove Community Center. And in fact, Becky, your daughter was taking lessons in that. And so the sign used to be literally in the case directly. I'd come outside my studio, it would be right there staring me in the face. And so in 2005, I called the numbers. They called Judy or Ross, and I called this number, and I never got a call back. And I was like, And then, you know, I was looking at it, and yeah, it was you. It was you. But one day I was like, well, this is ridiculous. You know what? I'm now finishing at 6:30. They start at 6:30, like 30 feet down the hall. I could just walk down there and say hello, couldn't I? Maybe, you know, maybe it wasn't personal that she didn't call me back.
It wasn't.
And, so yeah, I started in September of 2006, and purely because I was in the right place at the right time. Only writing group I've ever been to, and I've heard horror stories, but I stumbled into a really good one.
And that's how I stumbled into, because this friend wanted to help his friend get some students. So yes, it does. You help somebody and you get help back.
Yeah. So I want to go over, hopefully I can remember some of the past books we've had. We have had Shattered Faith by Rebecca May Hope. We have had Without Words by Lisa Jareen. We have had my book, the first Bluebells Chronicles books, Bluebells of Scotland. Who did we have last week?
Dan Blum.
And Dan Blum, right. Dan Blum's The Feats They Run was last week. Coming up next week, we have Jenny Zach Kiley's book, Daughter Number 5, and it's a memoir. May 25th, we're taking off because presumably it's Memorial Day, where we're all going to sit at home alone and memorialize something, I guess.
Yeah.
June 1st, we have Sean D. Brink's book, My Gypsy War Diary, coming up. And then we are finishing this spring session on June 8th with Dream of Dragons by Loretta and Michael Kehoe. And I'm in the process of setting up sort of a summer session, putting together some books for that. So
Well, how do we get a hold of both of those books?
both of which books?
The last two authors that you talked about.
Oh, if you go to gabrielshornpress.com/book-club, you will find the whole list. Even if you just go to gabrielshornpress.com, you should be able to go. I think it's under news and events or something like that. And you'll find the book club. And the book club page has all the books for this spring session. And when you click on each page, it should give you a direct link to Amazon, as well as the direct link to the Zoom meeting that,
That's what I wanted everybody
Yep.
who's not familiar with us to hear, so
Mhm.
that they can get these books, because we've written, these are good writers, and these are interesting stories. And every once in a while, I'll pick up a fiction book and I'll start it, and I'll go, "Oh God, I can't do this. It's not the quality I need."
Mhm.
The quality and the interesting characters and stories.
yeah,
They grab you.
yeah.
Grab you.
I think we have some very good writers. Yeah.
Laura, do you know, is Jenny's ready? Is it